CactusCon, bring your best game. How's it going, everyone? Everyone enjoying Saturday? Let's go. Cool. So thank you for having me. This is the Hardware Procurement Iceberg. Um, how many of you are in offensive security broadly? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you are, what do you call yourselves, pen testers? Raise your hand. Does anyone do offensive research? Raise your hand. Yes. Okay. I have a good audience. Yeah, so long story short, this is a framework for keeping your embedded research both fun, cheap, and ethical. I have to read this disclaimer. I'm sorry. So all views and opinions expressed in this presentation are my own and are not reflective of views and opinions held by my employer, my university, or other organizations that I affiliate with. So now that I have that out of the way, just a little bit about me. So how many of you looked at my handle and were like, what the hell is this? So you can be honest, that's fine. Okay, cool. Yeah, so yltsi stands for You Love to See It. My real name is Ben, so call me whatever. For my day job, I do application security for products in my company. But recently I've been working on getting a independent research imprint going for myself. So I've been trying my hand at live hacking for pretty much the last 2 years. Definitely learning along the way and stumbling more than succeeding. And one important thing to know, you saw embedded research on the abstract and the title. I got a computer science degree. I have no background in EE. I'm terrified of like magic smoke. Is anyone else kind of in the same boat? Like really afraid of frying hardware? It's a totally normal feeling, I think. And one thing that kind of drives my methodology is doing a lot more with a lot less. That makes me kind of like cheap as a side effect. Does anyone else enjoy being thrifty? Raise your hand. Yes, you're in the right room. Let's go. So I want to give a disclaimer. I just want to keep it real with you guys. This is sort of a few things to keep in mind if this talk is maybe not exactly for you. If you boil down this talk to a distillate and you really think about it, or if you're like kind of cynical, this is just a talk on how to buy hardware really, really cheap. But at the same time, this is kind of an under-discussed part of embedded security research. So I like to cover it, I like to discuss it, and really think about it. Any research that I'm working on for like my independent imprint or for live hacking submissions is competitive in nature, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. I hope that's okay. If you want to talk shop after the talk about specifics, I'm glad to share, but I don't want to get this on a recording. Some approaches covered in the talk may be ethically or legally dubious. The scale is kind of self-explanatory, and I'll get into that in a bit, but if you look at some of the techniques lower on the iceberg, kind of look inward and think about what you're doing and or consult with a lawyer before attempting some of them. I'm kind of a yapper. I'm also an unk. So there may be some detours on some slides. I have to pad 60 minutes. I've done this in 20. So do the math in terms of how much content I have to make up. As some of you have noticed already, this is an interactive presentation. I'll ask you to raise your hands if something applies to you. Raise your hand if that's like okay. All right, I know everyone's paying attention this way. Let's go. And this isn't going to trigger you if you're epileptic, but there's a slight contrast flashbang on the next slide. So let's rip the Band-Aid off. Ooh, behold. How many of you have seen this exact image of this iceberg before? Yeah, a lot of you guys like enthuse yourselves with memes or on the internet a lot, so I kind of expected it. So now the ultimate question: why did I choose this template? So a fair amount of you have seen this iceberg before. Have you guys seen the exploitable template where they have like the evil dolphin all the way on the bottom and like a guy that gets progressively more and more disheveled and beardy as it goes down? Raise your hand if you've seen that one. Yeah, so like I love this format. Number one, I think memes are one of the best ways to teach sort of more nebulous content in a way that's like transmissible and viral, frankly. So I used it for this talk. And the scale is pretty intuitive. At the top is sort of like the most obvious approaches that you could possibly take for embedded research. And as you go down, it becomes less and less common. And that's for reasons, right? Yes. The dark web iceberg is super good, but it doesn't have the evil dolphin. I love the evil dolphin, but this one doesn't have the evil dolphin either. So I'm sorry about that. But this sort of scalar model is nuanced with regard to risk. So as approaches become less and less common, you kind of start to wonder why. Progressively, as you go lower down the iceberg, there's kind of a higher risk of like financial loss or time loss or like even legal repercussions. So again, like you kind of have to consider it for yourself. And again, this is kind of like me just like shouting down to you the things that I've kind of explored. It's not rigorous whatsoever. This is probably a subset of all the things you could possibly do. But it's also relative, right? So if you disagree with the placement on the iceberg, it doesn't really matter. You can just like recategorize it for yourself based on your kind of priorities. Okay, cool. Yeah, so why this topic? And I'll talk a little bit about like prior art and I guess philosophical motivations behind it. So first and foremost, in the whole year of 2026, I think accessibility for actually performing embedded security research and hardware hacking is kind of like at a golden age. Like it just continued trending up and up and up since like the 2010s. And now it's kind of at the spot where if you have very rudimentary technical experience, you can start going into this, save your fear of, summoning magic smoke. A few really good resources that have popped up. So Riverloop Security has been acquired by 26 Technologies sometime a few years ago, but their website is basically like a little time capsule frozen in time. And they have this Hardware Hacking 101 blog post, which one entry was written by a former coworker and then a bunch of his coworkers at Riverloop, and they discuss really rudimentary hardware hacking techniques like tapping into JTAG, tapping into SPY, reading off of eMMC chips, which is like extended memory card format. And that's kind of a more advanced form of ROM, which isn't so straightforward in terms of how to extract firmware, but they cover it. So it's really nice. One great DEF CON main stage talk is by Andrew Bellini, where he goes into basically finding your first bugs on IoT. Is everyone familiar with how IoT products are very quickly and hastily developed and just shoved out the door? Yeah, everyone's kind of heard this logic before. Yeah, so that's super real. His talk covers that in a good introduction with good additional resources for depth. I realize I'm in Arizona. I'm a long way from home. Has anyone heard of DistrictCon's Junkyard competition? Raise your hand. Based. Okay, let's go. I will get into that in a bit, but it's kind of my inspiration for pursuing a personal research imprint, and I'd seriously recommend it to anyone. Stepping back from the concrete of research, a little bit more philosophical, there's a blog post that released in 2020 by Milan Skikovic. It's called Things You're Allowed to Do. It's like constantly been upgraded all the way into 2023. And it's kind of like, if you really think about our modern education system and like kind of our guardians and our peers, we're very much like negative driven. So we're like basically told stuff that we're not allowed to do, stuff that's like illegal or frowned upon or taboo. So this is kind of spinning that on its head and explicitly telling you the things that you are allowed to do. And that I'm trying to sort of occupy the same space and same spirit in this talk. This one's contentious. You can fight with me on numbers after this talk. But in my opinion, I think $1 saved is $1.67 earned. Oh God, I didn't even think about that. You're banned, man. You're banned. Yeah, 6-7 was not on purpose, but hear me out. Hear me out. How many of you are in part-time or full-time employment or contracting? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have had to suffer through taxes? Raise your hand. Does anyone remember the first paycheck you ever got? How crushed you were to see the final payment number go down to like half or like 2/3? Yeah. So if you consider income tax and then the tax after tax, which is like sales tax, the numbers dwindle pretty quickly. So you can be like, yeah, man, I make 6 figures. Like, how much do you actually take home, right? So if you're really, really careful with your budgeting and your personal financing, personally, I would say that saving $1 is significantly more impressive and much more powerful than earning $1 more in pre-tax income. So if you want to argue about that, definitely save it for after the talk. So again, we're in this golden era of how to hardware hack, but the actual logistics of getting a personal research imprint up and running is under-discussed. And that's kind of the niche that I'm trying to get into. On the bottom right is a small snippet from the Things You're Allowed to Do blog. It's very much not hacking like centric. It just talks about like general life things, like hire a researcher or like use dating apps. But I noticed this a little bit and I was like, oh, this guy's really thinking about the things that you are allowed to do. It's handy. Okay, so let's talk about DistrictCon Junkyard. This is the technically first live hacking competition I've ever placed in, and kind of where I got my first win. Have any of you considered submitting for a live hacking competition before? Raise your hand. Whoa. So this is newish to everyone? Yeah? Okay. How many of you have attempted or succeeded in bug bounty before? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have practiced responsible disclosure? Just because? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. The live hacking niche is still pretty small. It's kind of an emerging thing, but I'll give you an overview of all the major competitions first so you can get an idea of why Junkyard is kind of special. How many of you are familiar with Trend Micro or Zero Day Initiative's Pwn to Own competition? Raise your hand. Okay. For those of you that aren't engaged, it's kind of like the Olympics of live hacking. It's like it slowly but surely, as Pwn to Own has become a Western-aligned live hacking imprint, essentially it's become more and more competitive naturally, right? The prizes have gotten bigger. The skew has gone from independent researchers to basically company-paid research teams that go in and they hack on small home office like hardware and software, and they do it live on stage, and they even do like broadcasts and recordings that kind of make it feel like the NFL or the NBA. It's kind of ridiculous. Long story short, that's way too sweaty for me. I don't necessarily have that kind of leanness behind me, so that's kind of off the table for me. And honestly, it's kind of out of reach for anyone that's like in a sort of introductory or journeyman skill set for live hacking or security research in general. Everyone's familiar with HackerOne and BugCrowd here, right? It's sort of like the aggregate managed bug bounty that a lot of companies will go to instead of rolling their own. For what it's worth, it's a good service because it's a pain in the butt to manage. One thing that's not so obvious is that although they manage an asynchronous and continuous bug bounty program, they also have live hacking events. And these invites involve logistics, like flying out and being put out in a hotel. So you could grind their regular bug bounty stuff for maybe even years, and you might not even be guaranteed an invite. So for me, I think bug bounty in its present state is very, very painful. And I'm not really into that. So that's a no for me. Is anyone familiar with Zero Day Cloud? Raise your hand. Wow. Okay, it's really new, so I'm impressed. Long story short, Wiz Research, when Wiz got acquired by Google and is still working through that, they piloted a basically cloud stack live hacking competition this year. It's focused on a lot of software targets that comprise like the modern cloud stack. So it's anything from AI stuff. So it's like the NVIDIA compute collection or something, to like web servers like Apache Tomcat, or even like the Linux kernel or Containerd. There's just like a ton of targets, and it's much less known and therefore much less sweaty. But these are all software targets strictly, and I like hardware, and all the software targets that they cover are of maximum, like, I guess, open source exposure. So they're all fuzzed to death, and people are chronically trying to find bugs in them anyway. Another sort of off-putting thing to it is kind of like a recurring competition. It's not so clear if Zero Day Cloud is going to have a second installment since it's only been its first year. So yeah, in a way, I stumbled upon DistrictCon Junkyard. I do research pro gratis for this company called Andamiro. They're a arcade machine manufacturer and distributor in Korea, and they're very behind on the times. So they've made a lot of mistakes over the years, but they're generally very receptive, and they make a game that I love. So I'm happy to support them. I submitted a few bugs that I had banked for Junkyard, and surprisingly, they accepted it. The premise for Junkyard is that start to finish, you submit a bug for something that's strictly end of life. It can be hardware or software, so there's not many restrictions. They will try to get you a CVE assigned for your specific bug, and as soon as that's the case and you've responsibly disclosed it and confirmed that's end of life, you will be able to present it on stage at the conference in Washington, D.C. It's kind of awesome because it has an audience for both like high impact end of life vulnerabilities. So think of like the dusty router you keep in the corner of your room in your house, as well as like joke targets. It's like I submitted an entire like, how many of you are familiar with Dance Dance Revolution? Raise your hand. Okay, wow, amazing. Yeah, I submitted Pump It Up, which is like a Korean clone, but it has its uniqueness to it. And it's like this giant cabinet. It's literally taller than me. It's massive, and I wheel that thing on stage, and it was insane. The reception was very good. So yeah, joke targets is great. There's literally a best meme category for the competition, and I was just like, I'm gonna smurf this. I'm just gonna submit right for this, and hopefully I win. I was right. It's interesting because DistrictCon in general has really fantastic sponsors, and as a result, Junkyard has gained a lot of attention, and you end up getting really juicy prizes for bugs that are otherwise worthless on the open market. So I think the year that I won, first prize was $4,000 and second prize was $1,000. So you could submit pretty much anything in the wide open ocean of end of life targets and cash it out. There's a really high capacity for showmanship, and I'll get into that in a bit. Another thing is, if you care about the ethics of sort of traditional live hacking competitions, they're essentially skimming, I guess, a part of the value of the bug off of you. So they'll pay you a cash prize, then they'll go ahead and do all of the brokerage and negotiation between you, the researcher, them, the mediary, and then the vendor or other interested parties. And since it's an ancient bug and it's end of life, like, you don't have to worry about any ethical implications of your bug being brokered to someone that's not really aligning with you or unsavory. Does everyone kind of understand that portion of it? It's nebulous if you don't think about like geopolitics or what really happens to bugs down the line. You can kind of use your imagination there. And then another perk is competitions like one state away. It's basically in my backyard. DC's not a state, but humor me. Just a little bit of reminiscence of how it went. Casey from Bug Crowd volunteered as one of the judges to play on stage with me, which was ridiculous. Here's me holding first prize. And one unexpected thing that happened is Frack decided to do a special edition for Junkyard this year. And I did a little write-up of the bug that I presented for year 0, as well as dropping a 0 day. And it was the first article in Frack volume 72.5. So it's honestly just a fantastic time. I'd really recommend it. How many of you are actually familiar with how, I guess, bugs get found on hardware? A little bit? Vague idea? Okay, good. I have to do this because it's sort of an intermediate level talk. I'll just kind of go through the loose workflow, or at least how it works for me. So first and foremost, your firmware is going to be your source of truth for whatever you're researching. It's basically the software that's running on the hardware. You can sometimes get it off of a vendor website, and it's going to be fully unencrypted. It's going to be like in a zip file, or it's going to be like a squashfs file system, and then you just decompress it, and then you have the whole file system right there. That's not always the case, so it doesn't always flow freely like that. Sometimes it's going to be encrypted, and the encryption is like a symmetrical key, and if you take enough time, you can find a reliable way to crack it for all the firmwares that a vendor sells, but that's like additional research time. You may not want to focus on that. Sometimes they don't provide firmware at all on the website, so you'll literally have to take the chip off or put a chip clip on, and you'll have to read straight off the ROM and extract it off the chip. How many of you are familiar with QEMU, the quick emulator? Yeah, fantastic open source project. For those of you that use like any of the VMware products or VirtualBox, QEMU is far more lightweight. It has like an interesting file format that's like the QEMU copy on write format, which helps you deal with like snapshotting easier, but it's all like command line stuff. So some people find it overwhelming because of all the flags that they have and all the features that they have, and they just think it's arcane. But personally, I think it's very good. QEMU emulation of firmware can do a lot of busy work for you and get a lot of things out of the way. So if you use like a Ubuntu LTS image as a base, or like Debian Slim, you can just plop the firmware on, emulate it. It'll help you get rid of any of the like the cruft that's on the file system that you get, or like eliminate any dead code. It helps you identify entry points for actually booting whatever embedded device you have all the way up to working. But the problem is like firmware emulation can be a little bit imperfect. So if you have anything that's interacting with like GPIO, general purpose in and out, or any like exotic components on the board, obviously when you're emulating that, it's not going to be straightforward, and you're going to be missing that functionality. So it only gets you like so far. So if you want to have a proof of concept for a vulnerability that you found, you will most likely need to test it on a hardware using the default configuration that the factory ships with. That all makes sense, right? Okay. So sort of end to end, how that looks is if you have a device that you've been testing against, you'll need to factory reset it so it goes back to defaults. You need to test if your exploit works. Depending on the context, it could be remote, network adjacent, or you have like a limited shell already on it by some means. If you can confirm that your exploit works, you know that the bug is real, and then you can go ahead and start pursuing ways to get paid for it. And one thing that I personally don't have too much experience with, but it happens, sometimes you end up goring the hardware that you're working on. So you could like solder 2 test points together. You could cut traces to like cut off components that are connected to the rest of the device. Scratching off the solder mask so you can access hidden vias and test points on the board. Sometimes, like I said, if you are having a lot of trouble getting the firmware off, and it's a format like eMMC where you can't just put a chip clip on it, you have to take the chip off and do a read. You can also do things such as like fault injection via heat voltage, much more advanced techniques that could, get you a shell or something interesting on the device. Still with me? Okay, it's iceberg time. Let's get it. So at the very top of the iceberg, obviously, just buy something from the retailer that you're interested in. If you walk into Best Buy or you walk into Fry's, rest in peace, Fry's Hardware. Does anyone remember Fry's Hardware? What a Micro Center. Wait, you guys have Micro Center out here? Dang, let's go. That's a good replacement for Fry's. They're spiritually similar, right? But yeah, you walk into a retailer, you find all of this, typically consumer hardware that's available, and that's an obvious attack vector, right? Like the dusty router that you have in your room. Someone's going to try to pop that if it's accidentally exposed to the internet or you have it misconfigured. But if we really think about you buying stuff from a store, I think legally speaking, it's fairly complicated under the hood. So let's take an example. You walk into a store, right? You notice watermelons are marked as 3 cents each. You're like, damn, could really go for some watermelon right now. You walk up with the bunches of watermelons that you bought to the cash register, and they don't scan watermelons. They don't have like barcodes on them, but they'll punch it in the system and they'll be like, okay, I got you for 3 watermelons. It rings up as 3 cents as advertised. As soon as you hand over the money and they give you a receipt, the requirements of that contract are considered fulfilled, right? So you can walk out of the store with your bunches of watermelons and you're good. You just hit a fat lick. So to abstract that a little bit, a purchase order, when you buy something at a store or on like a website, which is more common for me, is a contract at the end of the day. You submit it saying that you're offering to buying something for a certain price. The vendor has to accept it, and practically speaking, on a website, they end up shipping your item after the payment's processed. And then as soon as it lands at your door, the contract is considered fulfilled for most purposes. So yeah, and we'll get into why that matters a bit later. But additionally, any additional clauses after the sale typically benefit you. So anything from like return policies, exchange policies, warranties, either the manufacturer or the business that you do business with provides those things. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you have hardware and you modify it by like, I don't know, soldering things together, it's probably going to void that warranty. So sometimes that makes sense, sometimes that doesn't. You kind of have to use your gut. One benefit to this technique is sometimes time is money. So if you just need to buy something off the shelf to verify an exploit, just do it, man. Like if you're really confident that your bug works, just do it. The only drawback for this is if you live in the US, this is kind of going to be a mixed bag for anything that's like an enterprise piece of hardware or anything that's like sold more in the global market, because every single country has like different market share for routers, like industrial equipment, medical devices, stuff like that. So it has its limits, but it goes at the very top because this is the most obvious thing, right? Yeah, I love stock images. Borrowing from a friend is a interesting way to go about it. Make sure it's like a good friend though. The one thing that I would like to highlight is if you borrow a piece of hardware from your friend, it's not yours, right? So if you plan on doing some sort of research, definitely ask your friend up front and establish your rules of engagement, right? Like ask if they're okay with like soldering stuff together, cracking off the chassis, stripping screws, like all that stuff. If it's something they like pulled out of the garage, they probably won't care. But if it's like their pride and joy, it's nice to just be courteous. And of course, if you do end up being successful researching the device, you should definitely offer something in return. For the time that you're borrowing it, you can offer some piece of collateral just to make sure you don't walk off with it and torture your friendship. You can always offer like a flat amount or like a percent cut of any bounty money that you end up getting. That's always nice. Offer them a hot meal, a favor, like literally anything of value to sort of nourish that friendship after the transaction. And to me, I think it's community service sometimes to just update firmware before you return something. For some reason, some manufacturers make firmware upgrades incredibly difficult. So if you're in a place of power to upgrade that firmware, it's kind of like community service. The only problem with this approach is the targets that you get are a reflection of how interesting your friends are, right? So if they're just like buying garbage, like you're gonna be researching garbage. So pick your most interesting friends. The thrift shop. Who loves going to the thrift shop? Vintage shop, antique mall. Yeah, it's good stuff. You're definitely subject to the luck of the draw. It's all a bunch of like secondhand used surprises. Sometimes you end up with stuff that's still like factory wrapped that people donated. That's always a treat. But most of the stuff that you end up seeing in a thrift shop is mostly going to be legacy technology or just like junk. The other issue with this is that if you pick it up, it is definitely priced to sell. And that means that there's no assurances on whether the device has been tested at all. So, you know, thrift shops sometimes do have return policies of some things like a lemon, but it's going to be untested when you take it home the first time, and you just won't know. It's definitely the undisputed budget champion, and it's how many of you have I guess created end days for non-public exploits or recreated exploits for end days before? Raise your hand. A few. That's a really good way to get your chops in offensive research and offensive security. Just like taking a advisory, following the really vague description of the bug, and then actually making an exploit that works. A lot of people try to do it with AI, and it turns into like absolute slop. So there's still a lot of I don't know, ways to prove yourself as a human in this sphere. So the thrift shop's actually great for that because all you get is legacy. It's amazing. But yeah, based on the devices that you pull out of the thrift shop, it's fertile grounds for like learning, developing end days, and making mistakes, like making magic smoke come out or like breaking a device. It's like low stakes. For the arcade machine that I was hacking on for DistrictCon, I accidentally shorted something and it triggered the surge protection on the motherboard and reverted all of the BIOS defaults back. And they don't load USB drivers for BIOS by default. So you have to go by this ancient standard. Does anyone recognize this, PS/2? Yeah, this is how peripherals used to work back in the day. It's trash. No way. Do they use the hotkey buttons in the top right corner? The internet button is crazy. There you go. Yeah, this keyboard's undefeated, but I did end up returning it for store credit. I'm that cheap. Sorry, guys. But yeah, I went to the thrift shop the same day because I was like, damn, I have a deadline. I have to make this work. I was like shuffling through the keyboard section. And I saw the port, and I was like, okay, taking it home. $4. What can you buy for $4 these days? You can't even buy a bag of ice. What the hell? So the thrift shop is fantastic. So now we're going to start going below the surface. Electronics recyclers, these can go by a number of names. Anything with like e-waste, recycling, salvage, asset retirement, data destruction. Has anyone been to a shop like this before? Raise your hands. More than I thought. Let's go. This is the nexus for like all sorts of electronics. Could be consumer stuff. Sometimes it's going to be like small office, home office. Sometimes it's going to be full on enterprise. Really, the variety of the targets you can find at an e-waste recycler is going to be as far as word of mouth or like SEO for the particular service. It's going to be like almost hyper regional, then, because typically you'll have a big e-waste imprint serving an entire region, like a tri-state or quad-state region. The nice thing about e-waste recyclers is that they're certified. The EPA has 2 officially recognized, I guess, certifications for e-waste recyclers. I think it's R2 and e-stewards, but I think RIOS is a third one that's not. formally recognized by them, and it's actually a pretty good indicator that they'll end up doing testing and verification of all the products that they have before they make it on the floor. And that's really good, right? Because if you're just sort of taking a embedded device at face value, you want to be able to explore all the features possible to see how many vectors you have for interesting exploits. But the issue is testing can be a little bit shaky from these folks, even if they're certified. You kind of have to look for keywords like full function tested or key function tested to see if like certain components of it are not working, or if it's like completely working, just like you maybe bought it from the store. So that's kind of one thing that you. Okay, eBay. Yeah, there's a lot of junk on eBay, but it's always amazing what comes up there, and people part with really questionable items sometimes. Um, eBay is really fantastic as a platform for if you know what you want to hack on in terms of like a target. Like if you're dead set on something specific, but you want to save some money, you don't want to buy a new, you don't want to jump through a bunch of hoops to buy it, like through some other international retailer. eBay search is fantastic. How many of you have used eBay like for anything ever? How many of you have used the search feature? I think it's required. Yeah, the recommender is not very good. Because it's searchable and you have something in mind, you'll be able to find the target that you want to hack on eventually, right? And the types of devices and electronics that come across eBay are not particularly limited. Like I'm fairly certain that I saw like a hospital liquidation end up under one account on eBay, and they were just like selling all these medical devices. And I was like, $30 for like an infusion pump? What? It's unfathomable. But you know, this doesn't come up all the time. Even though it's a global marketplace, you do have to you have to have some time and patience for really obscure targets. So if you're going for like industrial control stuff, you won't expect that to pop up every day. Routers, I got tons of them. eBay is nice because it has global reach. One interesting thing is the international shipping program. So one thing that's common is if you want to buy something that's listed in Europe, instead of shipping peer-to-peer over EMS or like domestic mail carriers, they will give you a shipping label and they will ship it basically to a warehouse that's right on the edge, like basically at the tip of the Atlantic Ocean. Then they load up all these parcels, put it on a like surface mail, which is basically a boat, and then it'll come back to their warehouse on the other side of the Atlantic, and then they'll ship it to you via typically USPS. It's quite nice. And how many of you have been suffering through tariffs recently, directly or indirectly? Raise your hands. Yeah, this is like one of those cost-cutting measures that eBay implements that kind of helps soothe the damage from tariffs. Have any of you read the buyer protection terms for eBay? They are amazing. So I've had situations where I buy an item, it's listed. This is a very unscrupulous personal seller. They will send me an item that's like kind of there. It's like made by the same manufacturer, but it's a completely different model. And they're just trying to like offload all this stuff and abandon their account, right? So I'm like, hey dude, I messaged them. Hey dude, this is not what I ordered. Like, can I return this to you? Can we make this right somehow? Do you actually have this model still in your stock? Guy never responded. I submit a case via eBay, and they send a very scary looking email if you're in a buyer seller dispute, and the guy never responds because he just abandoned his account. So eBay is like, okay, we can find a resolution for this, so we're gonna refund you your money and we're gonna let you keep the item. So I was like, $300 router free? Yeah, let's go. So like buyer protection is super duper good for you as a researcher. Sometimes you get a windfall or two, and it's so sweet when you get something for free. It's so nice. eBay has its limitations as a platform. One thing that I like, especially if they're accepting offers on a listing, there's a website called watchcount.com, which tracks pretty much every single listing on the eBay platform, and they'll even tell you how long a specific item has been listed for. And like if it's been sitting for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you can be like, dude, do you want to sell this or not? Like, are you gonna take $6? Like, come on. Like, and sometimes they bite and you can get a pretty hefty discount on stuff. It's really nice. I have 15 minutes left. How is that possible? Facebook Marketplace. Okay, how many of you have had a hilarious or really disappointing Facebook Marketplace experience? Raise your hand. Yeah. The way I like to describe Facebook Marketplace, it's like a player versus player arena for like really questionable items. It's super duper unhinged. Because Meta doesn't care. There's no feedback system because everyone just has like a personal Facebook account and they list through this platform. And you can't just give someone like 1 star or 5 stars, right? You can post in community groups that are apart from the marketplace saying like this particular guy is a scammer. But like there are so many compromised accounts, fake accounts, sock puppet accounts, accounts that are abandoned after like 1 transaction where that kind of feedback system just like completely degrades. It just doesn't make sense. And yeah, there's just like a bunch of scammers in the platform, but there are some honest people on there too. So I know that haggling is not a particularly common practice in the West. However, in the East, you can pretty much haggle for anything in some countries and some cities. I think Facebook Marketplace, because some people are desperate to sell for either, you know, like liquidity or unfortunate circumstances, is a really good place to learn market psychology because you can just message someone, give them an offer, and then they can just either accept or reject. You guys flame each other, eventually settle on a price, and like it's just nice. It's a really good place to practice that kind of stuff. There's always a risk for like fenced or stolen goods. So what I like to do is like if you're buying a car, check a VIN, make sure it's not stolen. There's like a like epidemic of ghost cars going on right now, where they just like steal a car, they'll sell it as a striker or sell it as like a lemon or like a daily driver, but it's actually a stolen car. And these people disappear without a trace and leave you on the hook. So you have to do your due diligence a bit. Facebook's marketplace search is terrible. Like it doesn't rank anything good at all. If I'm looking for something in particular, it'll just give me random nonsense in the front and I have to scroll all the way down. On top of that, it's kind of hyper local. Because of how scammers have become super emboldened with things like, I don't know, photography equipment and other things that are shippable, but like high-end electronics. If you're going to buy something off of Facebook Marketplace, it's most likely going to be pickup only, right? Thanks a lot, scammers. And of course, when you're buying stuff, typically anything with a low platform fee or cash is kind of the king here. Like that's the only way you're going to be able to pay for your item. But of course, that means no refunds, so buyer beware. Okay, yes. GovDeals. Who has heard of GovDeals or any of the liquidity services brands? Raise your hand. I'm glad you guys are so in the know. It's amazing. A lot of people don't know about this. So yes, yes, yes. And there are like GovDeals is not the only game in town. There are always like I guess localized liquidation auction platforms that exist. You kind of just have to look in your tri-state and see which ones exist. Long story short, for those that don't know, GovDeals is a liquidation site from state, federal agencies, businesses, school districts, all that stuff. You can find literally anything on the platform. Personally, I've been in the market for like a vending machine. There's like a Vendo model with this cascading waterfall on it. It's very vaporwave and beautiful. They have come up on the site before. You can buy like a plot of land in Arkansas. You can buy like a Thermo Fisher Scientific DNA sequencer. Literally anything that's feasibly owned by like one of these agencies and they're trying to sell it off because they're closing an office or something like that. The bid increments are really, really low. So you tend to get things in lots at very steep discounts. Is anyone familiar with what an auction reserve is? Raise your hand. For those that aren't, sometimes the seller will expect a minimum price for an item to go at auction. I think it's trash. It goes against auction theory. Doesn't make sense. But the beauty of GovDeals is sometimes you won't have reserves on these huge lots of electronics. So you can get like router equipment, switches, stuff like that you could feasibly even use for your home lab for like $70. But you basically have like a home lab on a pallet and you get it for super duper cheap. It is great. Like I said, lots. They're often sold in lots. If you only need one of one thing, but you're forced to buy 20, if you have just a little bit of grit, you can just like find buyers for the other 19 items of the 20 you bought, and you'll end up breaking even or like even breaking positive from the net sale. So it's a good way to like even subsidize some of your research in that regard. Like I said, GovDeals is not the only one. There are sometimes tri-state, quad-state liquidation sites. You kind of have to search those out for yourselves. I won't do your homework for you. One piece of feedback I got is BidSpotter. BidSpotter is another major like liquidation site. They have a whole lab equipment and medical equipment liquidation section, which I find really interesting. But they kind of have like printing equipment, automotive stuff like that. So it's not exactly lining up with my angle in a better research, but it's something to keep in mind if you're looking. Okay, price trackers. Does anyone subscribe to a price tracker for anything? Raise your hand. I know Camel is really popular for Amazon items. BrickSeek, is anyone familiar with BrickSeek? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. So it's like, yeah, who doesn't love a deal? There are people that scrape websites or crawl websites, and they will provide you essentially alerts via whatever means you want to tell you when something goes on sale. So typically you end up signing up for a service like BrickSeek. I think it's the most popular because they have, I guess, commercial electronics, both consumer side and business side, and they do end up popping up. Walmart has fantastic in-store deals even to this day, for example, and they all get indexed and aggregated in BrickSeek. Now, personally, I like to write my own. My interests are a little bit more niche than just like broad consumer electronics. For example, does anyone drink like Third Wave or craft coffee? Raise your hand. Like really fancy, like snooty coffee. Okay, just me, but that's fine. I have a personal price tracker that I wrote in Python for that kind of thing. When you end up writing your own price tracker, you can choose exactly what sites you choose to crawl and scrape. So it's very much catered to your interests. You can hook it up to do notifications via like IRC, email, Discord, Telegram, anything that has like a webhook or some sort of interface to funnel all these notifications through. And you will end up essentially beating the crowd for some of these like mass market price trackers like BrickSeek. Now, one downside to this is deep discounts can invalidate return policies sometimes. So if you end up buying something and you regret it, you're probably not going to have recourse if you bought it for disgustingly cheap. So just keep that in mind. Great example of something that my price tracker caught. Sometimes third wave coffee roasters will also sell coffee brewing equipment. The Asaya Lunar is a very, very schmancy, fancy, high-end espresso scale, including a pour-over scale, which dynamically rescales as you pour water, and it hooks up via Bluetooth, and it's really interesting, but is freaking expensive. It's $250. One roaster that personally I think their coffee is not very good, but still like to see what they put on the website. They put a coming soon for this. As it turns out, if you just change the button to add to cart, it'll just add to cart. And on the back end, it's coded as $0. So all you do is end up paying for shipping. And this is how I made it out the door for 13 bucks. Oops. Yeah. So, and I've given this presentation before at B-Sides in Portland. And I guess I've coined the term already, but in my circles, we've kind of discussed the theoretics of a technique called ret to retailer, or at least I'll call it that. Long story short, return policies exist to your benefit. You should definitely be honest and respectful to the retailers that enable you to do this kind of research. But essentially, if you're on a rock bottom budget, you can use these return policies to your advantage. It is very much like bending the rules to the maximum. When you end up buying a item that you will most likely not be satisfied with or end up returning in the long run, it requires a very delicate like hardware teardown. So you're gonna want to put your gloves on. You're gonna use plastic spudgers to like peel the chassis off. Place like rubber bands or silicone tabs on the screws so they don't like strip and it doesn't show any evidence of tampering. Masking tape on every single plastic that you encounter so it doesn't have any like micro scratches. Basically, you want to keep the item looking as new as possible. You're going to want to hold on to everything that comes with the item in the box. So I'm talking like little baggies, twist ties, papers for like instruction manuals and warranties. You're going to want to hold on to everything. When you do this technique, obviously you're going to forget about any sort of invasive tampering that you would otherwise pursue for more hardware hacking sort of approaches. So forget anything about like desoldering ROM and doing a chip off read or even doing like fault injection of any sort. That's just not going to happen at all. When you do this kind of thing, you should definitely support your local store because shipping it back and paying a restocking fee is just a blatant waste of money. If you have like a very busy research cycle and you're like drilling down on one big box retailer's inventory at once. You should probably just like buy a bunch of items, do all the research you can within the return policy, and then batch all of the returns in one go. Save yourself some gas, save yourself some trouble. If you happen to find a bug and you get paid out for it, you should definitely pay it forward to the store that you borrowed from the return policy. In my case, I'll end up typically just keeping the item that I bought. Yeah, if I end up getting a bigger, I guess, bounty amount, I'll end up splashing some of that money on some new gear that I need. It's just a good way to support the business that kind of enabled you to do this research. If you end up returning the item, it's not a big deal. Again, you can perform some community service, update the firmware before you return it. Most retailers, when they end up restocking this stuff, sometimes they'll charge you a restocking fee, which I think is honestly a good sign because it implies that they're doing some testing, verification, repackaging before they put something back as open box or even sometimes as new. But if you upgrade the firmware, you're kind of helping them, do a little bit less work for your deviancy. I'm gonna just put a warning out there. This is sort of a technique that's known as wardrobing. Has anyone heard of wardrobing before? Okay. It's a variation of return fraud. However, you'll typically see it for folks that buy clothing or electronics. They'll use it for an event, and the entire premise is their initial intent is to return it. The way that some return policies are written are no questions asked, satisfaction guaranteed, item no longer needed, or buyer's remorse. If you don't find a bug on the platform that you're researching, I would say that's a fair case of buyer's remorse. Whether that will hold up in court or not, I'm not quite sure. But always read the terms and conditions for valid return reasons and figure out exactly what those acceptable conditions are. So I will just put this up here for you to read. Rest in peace, fries. It's not a surprise why they didn't last very long, but this is the return policy that they had. Typically, no questions asked, 30 days of the original purchase date. They have a few cutouts and exclusions for like gamer gear and DJ gear that you can only return if it's unopened. But as far as like, I don't know, small office, home routers, printers, you can just do whatever you want to it as long as it comes back in an acceptable state. In 30 days, you'll get your money back. So, and I guess the last one, Shodan. Everyone's familiar with Shodan in here, right? Mass internet scanner, just indexes pretty much every device that's just open on the internet. If you're doing offensive research and you're trying to find 0 days, I would super duper not recommend this. Number one, it's not your hardware, and trying to like intrude on someone else's device is super illegal. Certain device services, as soon as you like connect them up to a home network, will sometimes punch a hole through your network and just expose it to the internet. Typically, you almost have to try in the modern day for that to happen. That's like a severe misconfiguration. Very few devices these days like make it to mass market and have that be the case by default, but sometimes it happens. You always have to check. If you find a device that you think is your device that you're testing upon, there's like a decent chance that it might be a honeypot via Shodan. So like, if you want to give away your exploit, yeah, send it against it. That's just fine. But you really shouldn't be doing that at the end of the day. One thing I will say that Shodan is pretty solid for is if you manage to search for a signature on Shodan that matches your device, it's a good way to test certain like non-vulnerability related recon things, such as like assumptions, defaults. But again, because just leaving your device open on the internet is not a common default these days, it's not so much the case anymore. So voila, take your photo now, because this is the hardware procurement iceberg. Everyone good? Okay, and I got 1 minute left. That's crazy. All right, so takeaways from this. There are a lot of ways to get into embedded security without having like a backing funder or organization. There are way too many like electronic devices that have computers shoved into them that deeply need your like problem solving and expertise. And we can just make the world a safer place by doing it. And this is the way to do it on the cheap. So go do research. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here. CactusCon, you're the best. And I'll take questions. We have a ton of time. Mm. So the question for everyone was, what is the actual like hours per week expectation you have to get into this? Um, like I mentioned, QEMU is like a really good way to at least attempt to emulate the firmware at the jump. I don't like buying stuff unless I need to, but just getting like a minimal emulated environment or just like picking apart a firmware image to be productive, I'd say cut out 8 hours. But if you have a full-time job or you have life, you know, responsibilities, is that the word? Yeah. You might not be able to squeeze in 8 hours, but one broad piece of advice is if you keep showing up and you keep doing a demonstrated effort, you're gonna end up like outpacing people that just like binge, like lose interest for a long time and then start binging again. So just be consistent. Even an hour a day is good. I think that's like a nice, simple framework for it. Yeah, you bet. Anyone else? A lot. I've had cases where eBay declined PayPal made you full? PayPal made you whole? Wow. I had the impression that eBay has actually diverged away from using PayPal, but I think they may have come back. There's a complete. Mm. That is terrible. That's good. Okay. I know there was a period of time where there was a schism and they were like, we're no longer supporting PayPal. We're only gonna have eBay buyer protections. But like if you think about how the business runs, all of that buyer protection stuff comes out of like a designated slush fund. It's like the Make It Right fund or something of the sort. Um, so if ethics and morals were to go down the drain, like yes, enough people exploiting it, you're gonna have that benefit severely watered down. So what I did when I was an eBay seller is take a video of the package being put in the box, upload a scan of the actual like receipt that you get from USPS, for example. Um, yeah, you can do signature required for items over $800, and I think that's actually the official policy that they use. Um, but for anything under 800, I just stick to policy and it just works. They tend to work with you. But yes, as a seller, eBay is not very vested in continuing your business being there. So